It was a quiet Saturday afternoon in a small town that hardly ever saw any excitement. The streets were calm, and the soft hum of distant traffic mixed with the occasional chirping of birds. Henry, an elderly veteran in his 70s, walked slowly down the sidewalk. He carried a small grocery bag in one hand and his other hand rested lightly on his cane. Despite his age, there was a sense of dignity in his movements. His back was slightly bent from years of service, but his head stayed high, showing a quiet pride. Henry had served in the army for decades, traveling to faraway lands and facing challenges most people could never imagine. Now, retired, he enjoyed the small routines of life: a walk in the park, a chat with neighbors, and trips to the local grocery store. Today was supposed to be just another ordinary day. He had picked up a few essentials: bread, eggs, some fresh vegetables, and a bottle of olive oil. Nothing special, just the kind of things a man likes to have in his kitchen. As Henry walked, he noticed the familiar faces of neighbors tending to their gardens and children playing in the distance. He smiled at a woman watering her flowers and she waved back. Life was peaceful here, almost too peaceful, as if the town itself was wrapped in a comforting blanket of calm. But that calm was about to be broken. Down the street, the low roar of motorcycles grew louder, echoing through the empty avenues. A group of bikers was cruising through town, their engines rumbling like a small thunderstorm. They were young men, full of energy and a sense of invincibility that often comes with youth. Among them was one biker who stood out. He wasn't particularly large, but he had a reckless look in his eyes, a grin that spoke of mischief, and a confidence that bordered on arrogance. The biker noticed Henry as he crossed the street. Perhaps he thought it would be funny to scare an old man, or maybe it was just a careless attempt to show off. Without warning, he swerved his bike dangerously close to Henry, the tires kicking up dust from the pavement. Henry stumbled, the grocery bag slipping from his hand and the items spilling onto the sidewalk. "Hey, watch where you're going," Henry shouted, but his voice trembled slightly. It wasn't just fear, it was disbelief that someone could act so carelessly. The biker laughed, a harsh, loud sound that echoed off the buildings. "Relax, old man. Can't take a joke?" he shouted back, waving a dismissive hand before revving his bike and riding a few steps further down the street. Henry steadied himself with his cane, taking deep breaths to calm the sudden rush of adrenaline. His heart pounded, not just from the stumble but from the shock of being treated so carelessly. People nearby began to notice the commotion. A few heads poked out of windows and some neighbors came closer, curious and concerned. Henry picked up his groceries, careful not to drop them again, and continued walking, shaking his head. "Some people have no respect," he muttered under his breath. But little did anyone know the situation was far from over. Just around the corner, two very unexpected people were enjoying their day. Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson, who was visiting a friend in town, had just stepped out of a small cafe. His towering frame and unmistakable presence made him stand out even in casual clothes. Beside him was John Cena, who was in town filming a charity event. Both men were relaxed, laughing at something on Cena's phone, unaware that a situation was about to unfold just a few yards away. The roar of the motorcycles caught their attention. Both men looked up as they saw the biker's reckless maneuver. Time seemed to slow as they noticed Henry struggling to regain his balance. The biker, thinking he had won some small victory, hadn't realized that two of the most physically imposing and disciplined men in the world were watching. Without a word, The Rock and Cena moved in. Their steps were quick but controlled, a perfect balance of speed and caution. The biker, still laughing and unaware of what was behind him, didn't notice the approaching figures. As The Rock reached Henry, he gently steadied him with one hand. "You okay, sir?" he asked, his voice calm but commanding. Henry blinked, trying to process what was happening. He had heard of The Rock, of course, but never imagined he would meet him on an ordinary street in his town. And John Cena, moving to block the path of the biker, had a presence that made even the boldest feel small. The biker finally looked back, expecting perhaps a few annoyed neighbors. Instead, he saw two massive men standing behind Henry, their eyes locked on him. For a moment, he froze. The confidence that had fueled his reckless actions began to falter. He tried to act tough, revving his engine and throwing up his hands. "What's this? Who are you?" he shouted. The Rock didn't move closer aggressively. He didn't need to. His calm stance and the sheer size of his frame spoke volumes. John Cena, standing slightly to the side, mirrored the same composed energy. Together, they created a barrier of authority and protection, an invisible force that made the biker hesitate. Henry, still catching his breath, managed a shaky laugh. "I guess I picked the wrong day for groceries," he muttered, almost to himself. But he felt safe now, a feeling he hadn't realized he was craving after the brief scare. Around them, neighbors had started gathering, drawn by the unusual scene. Phones were raised, recording the moment. People whispered to one another, eyes wide with amazement. It wasn't every day that someone saw two famous action stars step into real-life hero mode, especially over something as small yet important as protecting an elderly veteran. The biker, now aware that he had underestimated the situation, tried to regain control. He waved his hands, attempting to scare them off. "Back off." "I didn't do anything," he yelled, though the words sounded weaker than he intended. The Rock's eyes didn't waver. He spoke in a calm but firm tone. "You need to stop. Right now." There was no anger in his voice, just a clarity that left no room for negotiation. Cena added, "Walk away. This is over." Henry, observing all this, felt a mixture of awe and relief. He had faced danger before, yes, during his service, but this was different. This was a strange, almost surreal moment where his ordinary life intersected with extraordinary individuals who chose to act without hesitation. The biker's grin began to fade. The engines of his motorcycle seemed louder now, but they couldn't mask the reality. He was outmatched. The crowd of neighbors grew, some clapping quietly, others whispering encouragement to Henry. For the first time since the encounter began, Henry felt a real sense of safety. The sudden adrenaline rush that had sent his heart racing was now replaced by gratitude. He realized that sometimes help comes from the most unexpected places. And courage isn't just about strength, it's about presence, timing, and the willingness to act. The biker, now hesitating and unsure, glanced around. He saw the gathering crowd, the phones capturing every move, and the towering figures of the Rock and John Cena. The energy of the situation had shifted completely. What had started as a careless, reckless act had turned into a moment where courage, presence, and integrity converged in the middle of a quiet town street. Henry straightened his back as best as he could, gripping his cane. "Well, I didn't see this coming today," he whispered, mostly to himself. And yet even in this strange, surreal moment, he couldn't help but feel a spark of hope. People still cared, and heroes, whether famous or ordinary, still existed in the world. The biker, realizing that his actions were now being closely watched and that there would be consequences, took a step back. He revved his bike one last time, unsure whether to flee or surrender to the reality he faced. Around him, the tension hung thick, but Henry knew one thing. He was no longer alone, and the danger he had felt moments ago had begun to fade. And just like that, what began as an ordinary day for Henry, a simple walk for groceries, had turned into a story that would be remembered in the town for years to come. It was a story of recklessness meeting courage, of ordinary life intersecting with extraordinary people, and of a quiet veteran who found himself at the center of an unexpected act of heroism. The tension on the quiet street grew thicker with every passing second. Henry, the elderly veteran, was still catching his breath, leaning on his cane, his hands trembling slightly from the scare. He had faced danger in his younger years in faraway lands, but nothing had prepared him for the shock of being threatened in his own peaceful neighborhood. His groceries were scattered on the sidewalk, but he didn't care about the spilled vegetables or the broken eggs. What mattered now was his safety. The biker, still revving his engine and trying to act tough, hadn't realized the full weight of the situation. He was used to intimidation. He thought the roar of his motorcycle and the confident sneer on his face could scare anyone. But standing before him were two figures who radiated calm authority. Dwayne, The Rock Johnson, and John Cena were not just celebrities. They were men who carried themselves with discipline, courage, and an undeniable presence. Their focus was entirely on Henry and on stopping him. The Rock stepped closer, moving with precision. Every motion was deliberate, controlled, and without haste. He gently placed a hand on Henry's shoulder. "It's okay, sir. You're safe now," he said, his voice low but firm. Henry blinked, struggling to absorb what was happening. He had heard of The Rock, of course, movies, wrestling, countless interviews, but never in a million years did he think he would meet him on a quiet town street. and John Cena standing beside them was just as imposing, his expression calm but alert. The biker finally stopped revving his engine, squinting at the two men. He wasn't sure what to do next. The confidence that had fueled his reckless actions moments ago was fading rapidly. The laughter that had once erupted from his throat now sounded forced, hollow. "Who are you?" he stammered. The Rock didn't need to answer with more words. His presence alone said everything, the kind of authority that can stop a reckless person in their tracks. Cena, standing slightly to the side, mirrored the same composed energy, forming an invisible barrier between Henry and the biker. The biker's bravado was crumbling, and it was obvious to anyone watching. Henry, still steadying himself, couldn't help but laugh softly, a mixture of relief and disbelief. "I guess today isn't going to be ordinary after all," he muttered under his breath. His voice shook slightly, but there was also a hint of amusement. Even after decades of service and countless challenges, life had a way of surprising him. The biker tried to act tough again, waving his hands and pointing at the two men. "Back off. I didn't do anything wrong," he shouted. Though his voice lacked conviction, he had clearly not anticipated facing anyone like this, especially not two men who seemed to carry a presence larger than life itself. John Cena's voice cut through the tension, calm but unyielding. "Step away from him now." There was no room for argument. The biker hesitated, realizing that this wasn't just about physical size or strength. It was about control, focus, and the unwavering confidence of people who knew how to handle a situation. The crowd of neighbors that had gathered began to murmur. Phones were raised, recording every moment, capturing what would soon become a story talked about for years. Everyone was silent, watching the drama unfold. They had never seen anything like this before. It wasn't just about a biker harassing an elderly man. It was about courage, presence, and unexpected heroes stepping in when needed. Henry felt a warmth in his chest. In his younger days, he had been the one protecting others, standing up in the face of danger. Now, for the first time in a long while, he was on the receiving end of protection, and it was humbling. The kindness and strength of these men reminded him that courage exists in many forms. The biker, sensing the crowd's eyes on him and feeling the weight of the situation, tried one last tactic. He revved his motorcycle louder, hoping the sound would intimidate the Rock and Cena. But the sound, instead of inspiring fear, made him appear more desperate. The two men didn't flinch. Their eyes remained fixed, unwavering. The biker realized that he was no longer in control, that his usual tricks and threats would not work here. The Rock's calm voice carried through the tense air. "You need to walk away. This isn't worth it." There was no anger, no shouting, only a quiet but firm insistence. Cena added, "Leave him alone. There's no reason for this." Their words were simple, but the authority behind them made it impossible to ignore. Henry, watching all of this, couldn't help but smile faintly. Even though he had been scared moments ago, he now felt a sense of relief and amazement. Life had a way of showing unexpected kindness, and today was proof. He whispered quietly to himself, "I never imagined this would happen in my lifetime." The biker's movements grew slower, more hesitant. He glanced at the growing crowd, at the phones pointed at him, at the two imposing figures who had taken over the street. He realized that what he had started as a minor act of recklessness had escalated into something much bigger and not in his favor. The Rock moved slightly, his stance relaxed but ready. He didn't need to make any threatening gestures. The mere act of standing firm with calm authority was enough. Cena mirrored the same energy, their teamwork silent but effective. The biker's eyes darted between them, unsure of what to do. He felt cornered, not by walls, but by integrity, discipline, and an unspoken promise that Henry would not be harmed. Henry, now steadier on his feet, looked at the biker and said quietly, "It's okay. Just go. Nothing good will come of this." His voice was calm, but there was a firmness that came from a lifetime of facing challenges. The biker, still trying to maintain some semblance of authority, hesitated. He could see that Henry was protected, and that the situation had completely shifted against him. The crowd began to clap quietly, a mix of relief and admiration. The neighbors who had been watching from windows came closer, some whispering encouragement, others just observing in awe. Henry felt a sense of community around him, a reassurance that people cared. The situation, once frightening, was now a testament to the power of standing up for what is right. Finally, the biker let out a frustrated sigh, revved his engine one last time, and slowly backed his motorcycle away. The Rock and Cena did not move closer. They simply remained vigilant, ensuring that Henry was safe. The biker, now realizing he was outmatched, rode off slowly, the roar of his engine fading into the distance. Henry exhaled, a deep breath that carried months, perhaps years, of tension and relief. He looked at the Rock and Cena, still in awe. I don't even know what to say," he murmured. His hands shook slightly, not from fear, but from the incredible relief and gratitude he felt. The Rock smiled gently. "You're safe now. That's all that matters." Cena nodded in agreement. "Just take care of yourself. That's enough for today." The crowd, sensing the end of the confrontation, began to disperse slowly. People whispered excitedly, sharing what they had just witnessed. Phones were still raised, capturing the final moments. For Henry, this was a day he would never forget. A day when ordinary life met extraordinary courage. As he picked up the rest of his groceries, the Rock and Cena remained nearby, ensuring that he could continue his walk safely. Henry couldn't stop smiling, feeling a mix of amazement, relief, and gratitude. He knew that life had a strange way of presenting heroes in unexpected places, and today he had witnessed it firsthand. The biker was gone, but the lesson remained clear. Courage, presence, and the willingness to act in the right moment could change everything. Henry continued his walk, slow but steady, feeling safer than he had in a long time. And as he disappeared down the quiet street, he couldn't help but think about how unpredictable life could be, how ordinary moments could turn extraordinary, and how sometimes heroes appear when you least expect them. Even after the biker rode off, the street was still buzzing with tension. Henry stood quietly, leaning on his cane, still catching his breath. His hands shook slightly, but there was also a growing sense of relief. For a moment he looked around at the neighbors who had gathered, their faces full of curiosity and concern. He realized that something extraordinary had just happened in his otherwise ordinary town. The Rock and John Cena remained close, their presence comforting. They didn't need to speak much. Their calm, watchful stances were enough to make anyone feel safe. Henry glanced at them, trying to find the right words. I can't thank you enough," he murmured. His voice was soft, but there was a sincerity in it that came from the heart. The Rock nodded gently. "You don't need to. Just make sure you stay safe, all right?" Cena added with a small smile. "That's what matters. That's all we want." Henry nodded, feeling a wave of gratitude wash over him. In that moment, he realized how fragile life could be. One second, he had been walking home with groceries, and the next, he had been threatened by a reckless biker. But then, out of nowhere, help had arrived. Not just help, but someone extraordinary. Even as Henry began to gather the scattered groceries, a new concern emerged. The biker might have left the street, but his reckless behavior could easily continue elsewhere. What if he tried the same thing with someone else? The thought made Henry uneasy. He turned to the Rock and Cena. He might do this again. Shouldn't something be done? Cena placed a reassuring hand on Henry's shoulder. "That's why we'll make sure the authorities know. This kind of behavior can't be ignored." The Rock added, "Don't worry. He won't get away with this. Not on our watch." As the three of them talked, neighbors slowly began to drift back to their homes, whispering among themselves. Phones were still out, recording the event, sharing videos on social media, and spreading the story far beyond the town. Henry could hardly believe it. What had started as a quiet, ordinary day had turned into something that would soon be talked about by people who had never even been to their little town. Suddenly, a few of the younger bystanders stepped forward, curiosity mixed with awe. Are you really the Rock?" one of them asked nervously, almost afraid to speak. Henry smiled quietly at the interaction. Even in the middle of a stressful situation, the presence of these men brought a sense of wonder and excitement to the day. "Yes," the Rock replied with a gentle smile. "But right now the important thing is that everyone stays calm and safe." Cena nodded in agreement, giving the kids a reassuring look. "We're not here to show off. We're here to help." Henry, observing all of this, felt a deep sense of pride. For years he had served his country, facing danger and protecting others. And now, in a twist of fate, he was being protected, even by men he had only seen on TV. He realized that courage comes in many forms, not just in combat or physical strength, but also in standing up for what's right. in stepping in when someone needs help. Meanwhile, the biker had not gone far. He had stopped a few streets away, leaning against a lamppost, his motorcycle idling beneath him. He was breathing heavily, trying to process what had just happened. His confidence, which had been so strong moments ago, had completely faded. He had expected a simple act of intimidation to go unnoticed, but instead, he had faced two of the most imposing men he had ever seen. He ran a hand over his face, frustrated and humiliated. The crowd's attention, the phones recording him, and the sheer presence of the Rock and Cena had stripped away his sense of control. He realized that this was more than a small-town encounter. It was a public moment, one that could follow him far beyond the streets he rode through. Back on the sidewalk, Henry was slowly putting his groceries back in order when a thought struck him. Despite the fear and chaos, he felt a sense of gratitude. He had survived the encounter without injury. He had witnessed courage and integrity in action, and he had seen firsthand that there are people willing to step in when they are needed most. The Rock, noticing Henry's calm return to routine, smiled faintly. "You've got a lot of strength, sir," he said. "You've been through a lot in your life, and it shows." Henry chuckled softly. "Strength comes in many forms," he replied. "Sometimes it's in fighting battles, and sometimes it's in standing still and letting others help you when needed." Cena, standing nearby, nodded in agreement. "Exactly. Everyone has their moment where they need help. There's no shame in that." As they continued to speak, the crowd began to disperse more confidently. People were still whispering in amazement, but the fear that had gripped the street earlier was gone. What remained was admiration, gratitude, and a newfound sense of community. Henry could see neighbors helping each other pick up groceries, checking on one another and quietly discussing what they had just witnessed. Henry, still leaning slightly on his cane, realized something important. Life is unpredictable. One moment can change everything. He had left his house for a simple errand, expecting nothing more than a peaceful walk and a few groceries. Instead, he had been confronted by danger, protected by extraordinary people, and reminded of the importance of courage and kindness. The biker, meanwhile, had decided to leave the area entirely, unsure of what to do next. His plan to intimidate Henry had completely failed, and he now faced the reality that his actions had consequences. For the first time that day, he truly understood that recklessness and aggression are not without limits, and that sometimes intervention comes from the most unexpected sources. Back on the sidewalk, Henry carefully collected his remaining groceries, feeling a renewed sense of calm. He glanced at the Rock and Cena one last time, a smile spreading across his face. "Thank you," he said simply, but with all the sincerity in his heart. "I won't forget this day." The Rock and Cena shared a small nod, their expressions calm but kind. "You don't need to remember us," the Rock said. "Just remember that people care and that it's always worth standing up for what's right." Cena added, "And always be careful out there. You've earned a little peace today." Henry laughed softly, feeling a mix of relief and amusement. He looked around at the street, now returning to its quiet, everyday rhythm. Children had gone back to playing, neighbors returned to their routines, and the hum of daily life began to fill the air once more. But for Henry, this day would never be ordinary again. He realized that courage is not just something found in battles far away or on grand stages. It is also in small, unexpected moments, like standing up for someone, protecting the vulnerable, or simply being present when it matters most. Today had shown him that heroes are real, and sometimes they appear in the most surprising places, at the most surprising times. As Henry walked the remaining distance to his home, groceries in hand and his cane steadying each step, he couldn't help but reflect on the events. He thought about the biker, whose recklessness had been stopped by courage. He thought about the neighbors who had witnessed bravery and kindness. And he thought about the Rock and Cena, who had taken the time to intervene when it mattered most. Henry smiled quietly, feeling a mix of gratitude and awe. He knew that life was unpredictable, but he also knew that it was filled with people willing to act when it mattered most. Today, an ordinary man had been threatened, but he had been protected by extraordinary courage. And that, he realized, was something truly worth remembering. The street returned to its peaceful calm, but the memory of what had happened lingered in the hearts of everyone present. It was a day that would be talked about for years, a story of courage meeting recklessness, of ordinary life intersecting with extraordinary heroes, and of an elderly veteran who experienced firsthand that kindness, bravery, and integrity are never out of reach. Henry finally stepped through his front door, closing it behind him. He placed his groceries on the kitchen counter and took a deep breath. The adrenaline was fading, leaving behind a sense of relief and reflection. He thought about what had just happened and realized that sometimes, even in the quietest moments of life, extraordinary things can occur. And sometimes help comes from the most unexpected places. The street was slowly returning to its usual calm, but the tension from earlier still lingered in the air. Henry, the elderly veteran, had returned home after gathering his groceries, but the thought of what had just happened kept replaying in his mind. He knew that the biker had been reckless, but he also understood that leaving the situation unresolved could mean danger for someone else. Henry had faced challenges before, and even now he couldn't ignore the importance of justice. Meanwhile, the biker had not completely left the area. He was parked a few blocks away, pacing nervously beside his motorcycle. The confidence and arrogance he had displayed earlier were gone, replaced with a growing sense of fear and uncertainty. For the first time, he truly understood that his actions had consequences. The laughter, the bravado, the sense of invincibility. It was all fading, leaving only the stark reality of the law and the people he had crossed. Back on the street, the Rock and John Cena had stayed nearby, ensuring that Henry was safe and that no further incidents occurred. They spoke quietly with some of the neighbors, collecting statements and reassuring everyone that the situation was under control. Their presence continued to draw attention, with phones raised and videos being shared across social media, but they remained focused on what truly mattered, ensuring safety and making sure justice was served. Henry, now sitting on a bench in his front yard, watched as the community began to come together. People who had been mere bystanders earlier were now stepping forward, offering help, sharing what they had seen, and ensuring that nothing had been damaged during the altercation. For Henry, this was a reminder of the strength of community, of how ordinary people could come together in the face of wrongdoing. The biker, realizing that he could not simply ignore what had happened, made a decision to return to the scene. Perhaps he thought he could talk his way out of it, or maybe he wanted to confront the crowd to reclaim his sense of control. As he rode back toward Henry Street, the neighborhood watch and some of the local residents were already preparing to intervene if necessary. The tension grew again as everyone wondered how this reckless young man would act now. As he approached, the flashing lights of police vehicles appeared down the road. Someone had called the authorities and help was on the way. The biker's confidence faltered entirely as he saw the officers moving quickly toward him. The roar of his engine no longer sounded threatening, it sounded desperate. He stopped the motorcycle abruptly, unsure of whether to fight, flee, or surrender. The Rock and Cena moved closer to Henry, but not in a threatening way. They stood as silent sentinels, ensuring that Henry remained safe while also maintaining a presence that discouraged any further reckless behavior. The biker, now realizing he was completely outnumbered and outmatched, raised his hands in surrender. The police officers approached carefully, giving clear instructions. "Step away from the bike and put your hands where we can see them." The biker complied, though his movements were hesitant and shaky. He knew that this time there would be no escape from responsibility. The crowd, which had watched in awe and fear, began to murmur, acknowledging that justice was finally arriving. Some neighbors clapped quietly, others whispered to one another about the bravery they had just witnessed, and Henry watched in quiet relief. The officers took control of the situation, carefully checking the biker and ensuring that he could not cause further harm. The motorcycle was secured, and the young man was escorted to the police vehicle. Even though he had tried to act tough, the reality of his actions had caught up with him, and there was no way to escape the consequences. Henry approached the officers, explaining exactly what had happened, describing the sequence of events, and giving a clear account of the biker's reckless behavior. The Rock and Cena stayed nearby, supporting Henry's statements and ensuring that the authorities had all the information they needed. Their presence added credibility and reassurance, showing that the biker's actions were serious and that no one could simply ignore them. As the police prepared to leave with the biker, Henry felt a profound sense of relief. He realized that justice had been served not through anger or retaliation, but through calm, careful action, and the involvement of people willing to step in when it mattered most. He had witnessed firsthand the power of courage, integrity, and community, and it left a lasting impression on him. The neighbors began to disperse, but many lingered, still talking about what had happened. Phones were raised, videos being shared online, and social media posts spreading quickly. The story of the elderly veteran threatened by a reckless biker and the intervention of two unexpected heroes captured hearts far beyond the small town. Henry could hardly believe it. What had started as a quiet day of running errands had become something extraordinary, something that would be remembered and shared widely. The biker, now in the back of the police car, had time to reflect on his actions. He had thought that recklessness and intimidation would give him power, but he had learned a powerful lesson, that courage, integrity, and presence could easily overpower arrogance and carelessness. He realized that the consequences of his actions were real, and that they could follow him far beyond the streets he had ridden through. Henry, sitting in his yard and catching his breath, thought about the day's events. He had lived through dangerous situations in the past, but nothing had felt quite like this. It wasn't just the fear or the threat. It was the sudden, unexpected intervention, the calm authority of two people stepping in to ensure his safety. It was a moment that reminded him of the importance of looking out for one another and standing up when necessary. The Rock and Cena, seeing that Henry was calm and the situation fully under control, finally began to step back. Their task was done, and they knew that the community and the authorities could handle the aftermath. But before leaving, they took a moment to speak directly to Henry. "You handled yourself well," The Rock said, his voice calm and encouraging. "You stayed strong, and that's important." Cena added, "Courage isn't just about fighting, it's about staying calm, clear, and standing up when it matters. You showed that today." Henry smiled, feeling a mix of pride and gratitude. "I just tried to stay steady. It's comforting to know that people will step in when needed," he replied softly. The officers led the biker away, ensuring that he would face the necessary consequences for his reckless actions. Henry watched as the police car disappeared around the corner, a sense of closure settling over him. The danger had passed, the immediate threat was gone, and the lesson was clear. Recklessness has limits, and there are always people willing to protect what is right. As the sun began to set over the town, Henry felt a deep sense of gratitude. He thought about the unexpected heroes who had intervened, the neighbors who had witnessed and supported him, and the importance of standing up for what is right. It was a day he would never forget, a day where ordinary life collided with extraordinary courage, and justice was served through calm, deliberate action. Even as the quiet returned to the street, Henry could feel the energy of what had happened lingering. The town had been reminded that courage, integrity, and community are not abstract ideas. They are real, living forces that can show up when needed most. He realized that today was not just about a confrontation with a reckless biker. It was about a lesson in humanity, a reminder that standing up for one another matters, and that even in small towns, extraordinary acts can happen. Henry finally went inside, placing his groceries on the kitchen counter. He took a deep breath, feeling the tension of the day slowly leaving his body. He thought about the events and smiled quietly. Today he had witnessed something remarkable: courage meeting recklessness, protection meeting vulnerability, and justice arriving through the calm determination of people who chose to act. As he sat down in his favorite chair, Henry reflected on the lesson of the day. Life is unpredictable, and danger can appear when least expected. But courage, presence, and integrity have a way of showing up just as unexpectedly, reminding us that there are people willing to stand up for what is right. And sometimes those people are ordinary individuals who choose to act in extraordinary ways. Henry looked out the window, the street now quiet and peaceful once more. He felt a sense of closure and relief. The biker had been stopped, the immediate danger had passed, and the town had witnessed an act of bravery that would be remembered. Today was a story of courage and justice, a reminder that even in ordinary life, extraordinary things can happen. The quiet town had finally begun to settle after the day's extraordinary events. Henry, the elderly veteran, was back inside his small home, taking a moment to sit and reflect on everything that had happened. The spilled groceries, the reckless biker, the sudden intervention of two unexpected heroes, it all felt almost unreal. Yet he knew it had happened. and he could still feel the lingering energy of the afternoon buzzing in his mind. Henry poured himself a cup of tea and took a slow sip, letting the warmth spread through him. It was a comforting ritual, one that had always grounded him after a long day. Today, however, the simple act felt different. Today it was not just about comfort. It was about relief, gratitude, and a renewed sense of connection to the world around him. The news had already begun to spread. A few neighbors had shared videos online, capturing the moment when the Rock and John Cena had intervened. Within hours, people from other towns and even other states were talking about the incident. Henry had never imagined that a quiet errand to the grocery store could turn into something so widely noticed. His story, combined with the presence of two of the world's most recognized figures, had resonated with people. It wasn't just a story about a reckless biker. It was a story about courage, humanity, and the unexpected kindness of strangers. Henry's mind drifted back to the moment when the Rock had steadied him, and John Cena had positioned himself between him and danger. He remembered the calm authority in their voices, the assurance that he was safe, and the way they had handled the situation without shouting or escalating it. It was a lesson in presence, discipline, and self-control, qualities that Henry had always admired but had rarely seen so clearly demonstrated in real life. The town, meanwhile, had been abuzz with conversation. Neighbors who had witnessed the event shared their versions of the story, each emphasizing the bravery and quick thinking of the two celebrities. People discussed how easily the situation could have turned out differently if help had not arrived at just the right moment. It was a reminder that life could change in an instant and that sometimes ordinary people are fortunate enough to witness or benefit from extraordinary acts of courage. Henry thought about the biker, now likely facing consequences for his actions. He realized that while the young man had caused fear and chaos, the situation had also become a lesson in accountability. Recklessness and aggression have limits, and today had shown that courage, presence, and community support could restore balance. Henry felt a quiet sense of closure knowing that justice had been served. The afternoon sun began to dip toward the horizon, casting a warm golden light across Henry's living room. He looked out the window at the familiar streets, now calm and quiet once more. Children had returned to playing, neighbors were tending to their gardens, and the usual sounds of daily life filled the air. Everything seemed ordinary again, yet Henry knew that the day would remain extraordinary in his memory. He reflected on the lessons he had learned, lessons that went beyond the immediate threat of the biker. He thought about courage, not just the courage of physical strength, but the courage of being present, of standing up for what is right, and of acting when others may hesitate. He thought about the kindness of strangers, and how their actions, no matter how brief, can leave a lasting impact. Henry also thought about community. He realized that in moments of crisis, it is not only individual bravery that matters, but also the collective support of people around you. Today, neighbors had watched, some had called for help, and together they had ensured that no harm came to him. The Rock and John Cena had been the extraordinary presence that tipped the balance, but the awareness and care of the community had reinforced it. Later that evening, Henry decided to write a note about what had happened, not for fame or recognition, but as a personal reminder of the day's lessons. He wrote about the fear he had felt, the shock of the biker's aggression, the relief of seeing the Rock and Cena intervene, and the gratitude he felt toward everyone who had helped in small ways. Writing it down made him feel calmer, as if putting the events into words could preserve the sense of closure and understanding that had grown throughout the day. Henry's thoughts also wandered to the future. He realized that the memory of the day could serve as inspiration for others, just as it had inspired him. Courage is contagious, he thought. Acts of kindness and bravery ripple outward, affecting people in ways we often cannot see. Today had been a vivid example of that truth. As the evening grew darker, Henry's house was filled with a peaceful silence. He thought about how life is unpredictable, how ordinary moments can suddenly become extraordinary, and how sometimes people we never expect become our protectors. He remembered the calm authority, the careful presence, and the courage of the two men who had intervened. But more than that, he